Every time you flush a toilet, you are throwing away something that used to belong to your landlord. In the modern world, human waste is a toxic hazard. It is something we pay the city to secretly pipe away beneath our feet. We flush, we forget, and we never think about it again. But for most of human history, flushing it away would have been considered a massive financial loss. Before modern underground sewers existed, human waste wasn't just garbage. It was a globally traded commodity. It was an industrial chemical. It was military ammunition. And in some of the largest cities on Earth, the rights to what you left in the chamber pot were legally written into your lease. To understand how cities survived before sewers, you have to completely erase the modern idea of waste. Today, we have a linear system: consume, excrete, and destroy. But for centuries, urban waste management was a fiercely competitive circular economy. Take the city of Edo, which we now call Tokyo. In the 18th century, Edo was one of the largest cities in the world, with over 1 million residents. But it didn't have a massive underground sewer network. Instead, it had a highly organized, heavily regulated market for what was politely called night soil. In an era before synthetic fertilizers, human waste was the absolute best way to keep agricultural land productive. So, farmers surrounding the city would travel into Edo, knocking on doors, offering to pay cash or trade fresh vegetables for a household's bodily waste. This became so lucrative that it triggered bizarre legal battles. If you rented an apartment in Edo, you did not own your own waste. The landlord did. The right to sell the tenant's night soil was a major source of a landlord's income. In fact, if a tenant fell behind on rent, landlords were known to punish them by locking the communal outhouses, trapping the valuable commodity inside. And the economics got incredibly specific. Waste was graded and priced based on the diet of the people who produced it. The waste of wealthy people, who ate rich diets full of fish and varied nutrients, sold for a premium. The waste from poorer neighborhoods, where the diet was mostly simple grains, was sold at a discount. This wasn't just an Asian phenomenon. If we travel back to ancient Rome, we find that human waste was just as valuable, but for a completely different reason. If you walk into a modern laundromat, you expect to smell detergent and clean cotton. But if you walked into a commercial laundry in ancient Rome, known as a fullery, your eyes would immediately start watering from the blinding stench of ammonia. The ancient world didn't have synthetic soap, but they still wanted their white togas to look perfectly bright and clean. To achieve this, Roman laundry workers relied on stale human urine. When urine sits for a few days, it breaks down into ammonia, which is a powerful cleaning agent that strips grease, sweat, and dirt out of wool. Urine was so vital to the Roman textile industry that large clay pots were left on street corners for men to relieve themselves in. Once full, the pots were hauled away to the laundries, where workers would literally stand in massive vats, stomping on the dirty clothes in a bath of stale urine and water. This chemical was in such high demand that in the first century, the Roman Emperor Vespasian realized he was missing out on a massive revenue stream. He instituted a specific tax on the collection of urine from public urinals. When his son, Titus, complained that taxing human urine was disgusting and beneath the dignity of the empire, Vespasian supposedly held a gold coin up to his son's nose and asked if it smelled bad. Titus said no. Vespasian replied, "Yet it comes from urine." This interaction gave birth to a Latin proverb that survived for centuries: money doesn't smell. But treating waste as a commodity didn't mean managing it was easy. As European cities exploded in population during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, the sheer volume of human output began to outpace the farmer's ability to cart it away. This is when the reality of living without sewers became highly dangerous. If you lived in London 400 years ago, you didn't have a flush toilet. You had a privy, which was essentially a wooden seat positioned over a massive brick pit dug deep into the ground. These were called cesspits. A large house might have a cesspit the size of a modern basement, designed to hold years of human waste before it needed to be emptied. But eventually, it did need to be emptied, and that required one of the deadliest jobs in the pre-modern city: the gong farmer. Gong farmers were the men hired to dig out the cesspits. Because the smell was so catastrophic, city laws often dictated that they could only work in the dead of night, usually between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. They would arrive with lanterns, ropes, buckets, and carts. This was not just disgusting work, it was lethal. As waste decomposes in a sealed underground brick pit, it produces massive amounts of methane and hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is a toxic gas that is heavier than air. It pools at the bottom of deep pits. A gong farmer lowered into a cesspit could easily be overcome by the fumes, pass out, and suffocate within minutes. Because of the extreme physical danger and the social stigma, gong farmers were paid incredibly well. In Tudor England, a gong farmer could earn 3 or 4 times the daily wage of an average laborer. It was hazard pay for entering the dark, toxic underbelly of the city while everyone else slept. But even the gong farmers weren't the most feared visitors to your cesspit. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the dirt beneath your outhouse attracted the attention of the military. Before the invention of modern synthetic chemistry, the only way to fire a musket or a cannon was with gunpowder, and the most difficult ingredient to find for gunpowder was potassium nitrate, also known as saltpeter. Where do you find saltpeter in the natural world? You find it in dirt that is highly saturated with decomposing nitrogen. You find it in the soil underneath stables, dovecotes, and human outhouses. This led to one of the most bizarre infringements on personal property in history. European monarchs, desperate for ammunition to fight their wars, created a special class of government agents known as saltpeter men. These men were granted extraordinary legal powers. They had the right to enter your property, tear up the floorboards of your outhouse or stable, and dig out the nitrate-rich dirt to boil down into gunpowder. They didn't have to ask your permission, and they rarely put the floor back together when they were done. For centuries, your bodily waste was a vital component of national security. So if human waste was so valuable as fertilizer, as a chemical, and as a military asset, why did we suddenly decide to bury it in massive underground sewer pipes and flush it out to sea? The answer is a strange twist of technological irony. The system didn't break because we produced too much waste. The system broke because of the invention of the flush toilet. In the early 19th century, the water closet began to appear in wealthy homes. To a Victorian gentleman, it seemed like a miracle of hygiene. You pull a handle, water rushes in, and the mess disappears. But there was a massive, unseen problem. At this point, cities like London still didn't have an integrated underground sewer network. They still relied on hundreds of thousands of brick cesspits. For centuries, these pits had held relatively dry, solid waste, which slowly decomposed. But suddenly, every time someone used a new water closet, they were dumping gallons of excess water down into the pit. The cesspits weren't designed to hold that much liquid. They began to overflow. Basements flooded with toxic sludge. The ground became saturated. The overflow spilled into the street gutters, which were only designed to carry rainwater into the rivers. By the summer of 1858, London reached a breaking point. The weather was unusually hot, and millions of gallons of raw, untreated human waste had poured directly into the River Thames. The river essentially became a slow-moving, boiling soup of excrement. This event became known as the Great Stink. The smell was so physically overpowering that people miles away were throwing up in the streets. The British Parliament, which sits right on the edge of the river, tried to soak their curtains in chloride of lime just to mask the odor, but it didn't work. Lawmakers were seen fleeing the building with handkerchiefs pressed to their faces. For the first time in history, the richest and most powerful men in the empire were entirely trapped by the consequences of urban waste. The Great Stink terrified the government into action. Within weeks, they rushed through funding for a brilliant engineer named Joseph Bazalgette to design a massive, modern, underground sewer system. He built over 1,000 miles of street sewers and massive intercepting brick tunnels to carry the waste far away from the city center. It was an engineering marvel. It saved countless lives from cholera and typhoid, but it also permanently changed human psychology. Before Bazalgette's sewers, waste was a visible, tangible part of the urban economy. It was something you traded, smelled, and managed. It had value. But once the underground pipes were built, waste vanished. It became invisible, and over the next century, as synthetic fertilizers replaced night soil and synthetic chemicals replaced urine, we completely forgot the old system. Today, we take the flush for granted. We sit in perfectly clean, brightly lit rooms, entirely disconnected from the biological reality of our own bodies. We pay taxes to ensure that what we leave behind is instantly transported away, treated with chemicals, and hidden from our sight. It is a miracle of modern public health. But it is also a profound historical luxury, because for thousands of years there was no such thing as throwing it away. Everything had a price, everything had a purpose, and absolutely nothing went to waste.